The Banking Scene Director's Cut goes behind the scenes, sharing stories and insights to help you build the bank of tomorrow.
So, Rick, do you know what the deal
Andrew.
is? When you write a blog, I ask you questions.
Yeah.
And I don't let you see them beforehand, mainly because I never make them beforehand. I just make them up as I go along because this is a
Well,
conversation.
It's a conversation. It's me asking you some questions, you asking me, and we give some feedback on each other, and we make each other think a bit longer about the blogs that we wrote, right?
That's it. That's it exactly. And
Those are the best.
it's prediction season at the moment. And you and I both don't make predictions.
Not
I
this
think-
year. I used to do it.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
That's been the one thing that I've never, ever been willing to do. I've even blogged about it, saying why I don't make predictions, because as a trained foresight consultant, we do not predict the future because there's never only one future. And we know that the future is up to those people who we are speaking to in this podcast. It's the audience that are actually going to make the future come about, not us. So I don't predict, but we can comment on the things that we think will be happening in 2026 and the direction of the industry at the moment. Rather controversially, you started your blog post this week with your first paragraph being what Backbase forgot to predict for 2026. So you actually used the prediction word. But you were talking about Agentic AI, which was quite topical, AI native, seeing that I've just interviewed Deepak Pandey from Backbase as well. And our entire conversation...
Which was a super interesting podcast, a bit technical. I listened to it yesterday.
I was going to say,
A bit technical, very topical, very AI-driven, and very data-driven as well. But also very internal from a bank point of view.
I think the thing that resonated with me the most about that, because you're right, it did get a lot more technical than a lot of our podcasts have been. But there was an underlying message there, which was also echoed by Dharmesh Mistry, who
worked for Backbase as a content contributor.
But his predictions, which have got nothing to do with Backbase, his predictions when he was talking about his predictions for 2026, he made some points, and these are nothing to do with the predictions, and he made some points that to me really resonated, because we've been talking about digitalization, whatever, for years now. You know, people have been digitizing, but essentially, most of that has been involved in doing the things that we've always been doing, but doing them faster, cheaper, and more efficient. And Dharmesh's argument, and it was something that Deepak from Backbase kept on saying, is that in today's world, that's no longer enough. You have to rethink and redesign, not just do digital. We had Chris Skinner writing a whole about doing digital a couple of years ago. Doing digital isn't good enough. And a lot of people are viewing AI and agentic as being something else that they do, that they're going to do we're going to, AI-ify everything. We're going to slap AI into everything. And I think that's one of the key things that we're going to see shifts is people are going to build their strategies around AI at the core more than AI just being a tool and something that's being done as a project or a pilot or an add-on. What do you think about that?
No, I agree. I agree with that. I think banks will need to keep modernizing or to keep pace. While you were talking, I was also quickly checking whether those predictions from Dharmesh were also included in that Backbase predictions 2026, because he was a contributor to those predictions as well. And also from a supplier point of view, which Backbase is, they provide software to the banks, so they need to cater to certain problems of banks in order to create that sense of urgency to work with them. So I understand why they look mostly internally to see how Agentic can help banks stay relevant, maybe as much as possible the way they are today, more than anything else. But in my blog, I also refer to BBVA, which is, I believe, the very first concrete example that I saw from a financial institution that is taking agentic to a whole new level. The level you and I have been talking about for a year now, and the level where, for example, Peter van Hees has been referring to at the Payments Barbecue Night and will hopefully also be referring to at the Banking Scene Conference Amsterdam on March 24, which is that in the future, banks don't need apps anymore. They don't need PC banking anymore. And that idea of hyper-personalization may no longer purely be about analyzing the data and offer something hyper-personalized to cater my needs, but also being there in a context that is not from a bank. Because at a certain moment, it's not just the banks having agents, but maybe also me having an agent that's much smarter than the chat GPT that we know today, which is already super smart. And that's, for example, what BBVA did. They created an app in chat GPT, so you can just directly connect to the bank in a third-party platform, being chat GPT. So far, it's only limited, I believe, to Germany and Italy. But once successful, who knows where it ends? I think that is a future that banks should be very cautious about, because that makes the brand of the bank even more anonymous than what it is today. And that means that we have shifted over 20, 30 years from having a personal advisor in the branch, being frustrated of needing to go to the branch for certain administrative tasks, to having an app, just one logo in your phone as a bank, to very soon, no logo anymore because you are contacting instinctively a bank through an agent, which is yours and not the bank's. And that is something that I didn't really see in the big base predictions. And again, I understand they're a platform provider, but they should not ignore it, because also that needs to be made possible. But a better English word, help me out.
Enabled? It needs to be
Enabled
enabled. It
needs to be
catered.
enabled by a platform like Backbasis for banks, I think.
I think just talking about your ChatGPT, and I posted a blog post last year on the banking scene following Money 2020, where I had a conversation there with somebody about the lack of conversations at Money 2020 about customer agents. And I had written a blog, I think I may have even written two, because I was quite passionate about the fact that people are not looking at agents from the customer's perspective. And I think at that time when I was writing, a lot of people were thinking, oh yeah, somebody's going to write an agent. They hadn't thought of ChatGPT or Copilot or anything like that being that agent, because in a very short space of time, less than a year, so many people have got so used to interacting with ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Copilot, just chatting to it. And constantly turning to it for information. It's infinitely smarter than I will ever be, can do things
Don't
a lot.
underestimate yourself, Andrew.
No,
And mind your words. I may be looking for another colleague soon then.
Well, I was going to say, you can just fire up an Andrew Forster agent in GPT.
Andrew Forster GPT.
That's it.
AVGPT.
I bet you there's enough information around there now for it to mimic me on our platform there.
How successful would Dave GPT still be?
Yeah, well, and Dave had spoken about that, 24 conference?
And our barbecue the year before, I think. So Dave is David Birch, for the ones who are listening. He introduced us to Dave GPT, so you could have your own GPT as if you are talking to David Birch about digital identity.
That's it. And now, as I say, I use ChatGPT on a daily basis. ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude. I flip between them because they give me different not different factual answers, but different approaches to the same thing. So often I'll ask the same question 3 times. But if I had a way of contacting my bank, maybe it's because I'm old, but right now I'm not sure I would yet be ready to trust financial transactions to GPT. But it does raise another thing, and that is the whole identity and trust thing, which I think is also missing from the what's going to be happening in 2026. Again, going back to Dave Birch, he's been writing a lot about it lately, about know your agent, the same way as we do KYC today, that banks are going to have to start doing KYA, know your agent. They're customers' agents. So if you are accessing your bank via an intermediary like ChatGPT, how are they going to know that it's actually acting on your behalf and that it's not me sitting at your keyboard typing the instructions to double my salary or something like that? There's got to be somewhere, and I think there's a trust element, a know your agent. That's going to be a big conversation over this next year as bigger customer adoption of agents come along.
Yeah,
I
which
think
was
that
clearly not part of my blog. But
no, no,
I do feel you. That's where I see potentially 3 or 4 major technologies coming together. Tokenization and blockchain technology to ensure that you have that ledger of information that proves that agent A or B can be trusted. Or maybe not so far future, having quantum computing, allowing much more calculations, which will be key if everyone is starting to build their own agents, because we won't be able to deal with all that. Probably sooner or later we'll hit the limits of calculations if we can't find a different way of calculating. And then we have the stablecoins and other currencies to allow microtransactions for very small transactions that you and I may not be interested in. But if we have an agent to deal with it, perhaps we can. We may be ending up in a completely different economy. That will not be for 2026, in my opinion.
yeah,
Might
I
be for
think that's a little bit
2030.
further.
We'll
It's a
see.
little bit further out, but actually, because you mentioned stablecoins, I'm going to have a brief plug for Thomas Duche, Business Development Director at Visa, who's going to be doing a keynote at our Luxembourg conference on the 27th January, unpacking stablecoins, which I'm going to be really curious to listen to because, I've been a cryptocurrency skeptic for a long time. However, stablecoins is something that I can understand the use case for. So I'm going to be very interested to see whether or not he does speak about how they would fit into an agentic ecosystem or something like that, and what the future of stablecoins are, because I think the conversation has gone around for a long time around cryptocurrency, and I will still firmly remain skeptical about Bitcoin and other things like that.
In that respect, I have a funny anecdote to share with you. We
Please,
actually celebrated New Year with a doggy dog.
with the doggy dog.
France we were at, they had the dog that is the mascot of the doggy coin. Or
Dogecoin.
Doji. Yeah.
Dogecoin. Yes.
Dogecoin. And they had such a dog, actually.
No. A real dog.
Yeah.
But getting back to your blog and seeing that I did mention that I was old, which for those people who are listening to the podcast and can't see the grey hair, although it has a green halo around it at the moment, private and wealth banking and the great wealth transfer was something that you met. Now, I couldn't read the interview.
Because you're so old and you didn't have your glasses.
Yeah, I didn't have my glasses. No, that was behind a paywall, the one that you had linked to from Investment Officer. But I am familiar with the concept that there's going to be this massive transfer of wealth from actually my generation. Unfortunately, my children aren't included in that transfer of wealth. I don't have enough to be transferring to them. But I know it's a big thing that in the wealth industry, it's a big worry. And it's mainly a worry because...
A worry or an opportunity? Depending on what side of the fence you are.
And that's what I was going to ask you. You've read the entire interview. We've had Emmanuel speak at our event as well.
Many talks with other bankers as I was preparing the banking scene conference Luxembourg.
So firstly, what's the concern in this wealth transfer? I mean, isn't it just, it's money. If my children get my money, so what? Why is that a concern moving from generations? What's sparking this concern in the industry?
Well, it's as I said, it's a concern as much as it's an opportunity. It's just an event happening. is a concern. Maybe if you're at the losing end, yes, it's an opportunity if you're winning. But essentially, it has to do with the fact that one generation will be making plans to distribute their wealth over children, maybe grandchildren, over the family fortune. And very often, and I think I mentioned 50% fear that inheritance will lead to family disputes. And that is a concern for private banks because they are dealing with that family and they want to make sure that the money stays at the bank. But they also want to make sure by doing that also means that you need to have alignment within the family. And so my interpretation of that is if you're talking about rethinking relevance, a private banker is no longer purely about managing money, but increasingly more, he's also psychologist and maybe a business consultant, so to say, because he needs to align all those different people, different generations, different interests, different values, perhaps as well, and needs to align all of those to make sure that the money remains safe, centrally distributed in companies that everyone feels okay with. Because if one person from that, let's call it ecosystem, falls, then the others need to or buy that person out or they lose their money and you get any serious financial consequences. So when it comes to rethinking relevance, for me, that had to do with the fact that private banking keeps changing. Over the past few years, it was a lot about we need technology to get rid of the administration, and rightfully so, because today we start to see that even more so, bankers are there to deal with the human relationships more than technology, but also more than administration, and maybe even more than the money itself.
You mentioned there that there may be differences across generations in values,
Well, there are.
ethos.
Yeah.
Ethos. Perhaps those bankers should have read your book then, because if the banks are keeping up with the current societal trends, then they should be able to cater for multiple generations, surely. It may be that my generation didn't
Absolutely, but I don't
care.
think that's a banker problem. It's a family thing. You need to align the family. It's not about a bank understanding different values. It's about making sure that as a bank, you can find that common denominator within the family so the family is aligned. And then the bank knows which way to go in terms of dealing with the money of the family. But first, you need align. It's a bit like I used to work at Colorado, one of the richest families because of their huge business they have in both retail, but all kinds of other things as well. They deal with their family almost like a company board or whatever. And every year they have a meeting with the 120 family members. That's the complexity that wealth managers are dealing with as well. It's not just about understanding these different individuals, but it's also making sure that they can understand each other and that they can think as one going forward. Because that's the only way you can properly and safely distribute the investments to make sure that you can fulfill those long-term needs. See what I mean?
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. I hadn't considered it as a family directional thing, but then of course that's the way that you would treat the investment is family office level, not individual members of the family,
No, no,
but
no,
getting
no,
the
no.
family
They won't
together.
go to Luxembourg.
No, understand that. Thank goodness my children never ever have to worry about that. So specifically, in terms of rethinking relevance in banking, banks rethinking relevance for their customers going forward in 2026. Is there anything else you'd like to highlight that we have on the agenda in Luxembourg coming up in only 2 weeks' time now? We've spoken about stablecoins. That's going to link to rethinking relevance in the evolving payments landscape. We're then going to be talking about rethinking relevance in a hyper-connected world, open banking, fraud, digital identity. We're moving on to Agentic AI, rethinking relevance in a new world of digital banking. Also going to be touching on the tokenized economy, bridging traditional finance and decentralized finance.
Yeah, and also using the blockchain technology within traditional finance to create more efficiency gains, transparency, etc. We'll look at that from a much broader perspective, and hopefully, especially not about a consumer point of view, but more about like the wholesale, custody, institutional level.
Well,
And then there's the private and wealth.
when we talk about blockchain, I think the biggest surprise for me of 2025 was Swift announcing their ledger, which I would still love to get an interview with Swift representative about their ledger project, because that one sort of, I think, took everybody by surprise at Cybos last year. So stay tuned for that one. I do have a contact. I'm just trying to see whether or not Swift are willing to let me interview that contact.
Very valuable contribution to the podcast, my friend.
Yes, yes. So it's going to be an exciting day in 2 weeks' time, and it's going to be a good way to kick off the strategy for the year ahead, rethinking relevance in banking altogether, the theme that will continue over Amsterdam and Brussels as well. If you've
Anything you're most looking forward to this year?
You know me,
We're
I've
on
got
2
this
weeks
thing
further,
about
and we're not going. I explicitly didn't talk about predictions.
Well, yeah, we didn't talk about predictions, but to me, the whole world of agentic AI, I can't wait to. I'm involved in panels about that. I'm doing another panel coming up at Finovate in February about ethics around AI. Doing a
I
panel.
got the regulatory and resiliency in Dora, followed by a book signing on ethos and ethics and transformation.
What date is that again that you're going to be in London signing books?
The 2nd, the 11th? The 11th, because a day later we have to be back in Brussels for dinner.
That's right. Yeah. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how this whole world of agentic and AI pans out over the next year.
Aren't you getting bored of it?
No, not at all. Every day I'm discovering new things to do with.
It might be worth checking Koen Abels. He has recently been posting some updates again. And, he will be in Amsterdam also as one of our speakers next to Peter van Hees. So it's going to be very interesting to look forward to.
And on that note, I'll bring this week's podcast to a close.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having the chat, Rick. I'm sure we'll speak again soon.
I'm sure we'll speak again soon as well, for sure. All right. Bye-bye.
Cheers.